Hamas has declared victory over Israel. I know, Gaza lies in ruins, tens of thousands of people lost their lives and millions displaced. All of Hamas's leaders in Gaza are gone, and yet, when the ceasefire took effect, Hamas's leaders, the surviving ones, were all smiles and declarations of victory. Is this delusion a serious case of cope, or did Hamas actually manage to snatch a strategic victory from the catastrophe they unleashed on Gaza? Let's look at 5 ways Hamas pulled off victory over Israel. Let's be clear, Hamas's ultimate goal is to destroy Israel. Obviously, they didn't succeed, but Hamas planned their onslaught to be as devastating as possible. They had horrifyingly specific instructions to burn, destroy, humiliate, and terrorize, and they fulfilled those directives gleefully, recording and even live streaming their brutality. Their aim wasn't military, but psychological. They calculated their assault to be as demoralizing as possible and strike fear into Israelis far beyond the battlefield. It worked. Israelis watched in horror as videos began to circulate of young women being dragged into captivity by their hair, tanks in flames as soldiers' bodies were dragged onto the back of mopeds, families huddling silently in their shelters, festival goers hiding in ditches by the side of the road. For one horrible day, the clock turned backwards. We returned to a world in which Jews were hunted, weak, without protection. Because there was no protection that day. Not from the high-tech billion-dollar security fence that ran along the Gaza border, which Hamas simply bulldozed through, and not from the army, which was caught unaware and unprepared. Israelis trusted their military, their government, their security services to keep them safe. But when Israeli observers along the border warned that Hamas was planning something big, their superiors laughed them off. The top brass believed that the country was too strong to worry about some Hamas commandos with more bravado than balls. They were wrong. In a matter of hours, Israelis' sense of security went up in smoke. Hamas had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, shattering a sense of security that many Israelis had taken for granted. Israelis even have a word for that naive sense of security lost on October 7th. They call it ha-conceptia, and Hamas obliterated it. Hamas didn't care about what happened after that, about the price that ordinary Gazans would pay. For a brief, shining moment, they had brought Israel to its knees, and they relished that victory. Vivian Silver believed in peace. She had dedicated her life to social justice, coexistence, and equality. For decades, she led initiatives to promote dialogue and cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians. Her movement, Women Wage Peace, focused on the human side of the conflict. In her spare time, she drove Gazans into Israel for medical treatments, believing that small acts of compassion could heal a region. And she wasn't alone in these beliefs. Her kibbutz, Be'eri, was among the loudest proponents of coexistence. For years, the members of Be'eri organized aid convoys to Gaza, offered jobs to Gazan workers, and taught Arabic in local Jewish schools. They had no power to set policies or pass legislation, but they believed that peace would grow from familiarity, that they were planting seeds that would eventually yield fruit. On October 7th, Hamas burned Vivian Silver alive in her home, leaving her body so badly degraded that it took 5 weeks to identify her remains. They slaughtered 101 of her neighbors and abducted another 32, and they accomplished what 8 decades of military confrontations had not. They destroyed many Israelis' dreams of two peoples living together in peace. Avida Bahar was a farmer in kibbutz Be'eri, a neighbor of Vivian Silver. Like her and so many others who lived along the border, he had believed in peace and coexistence. And then Hamas invaded his home, took the lives of his wife and son in front of his eyes, and injured him so badly he lost a leg. 6 months after October 7th, he returned to his kibbutz, without his wife, without his son, and without his long-held conviction that peace is possible. That conviction wasn't popular even before October 7th. The residents of the Gaza border communities were an outlier. Most were leftists, advocates of peace and coexistence. October 7th was a nasty shock. Yocheved Lifshitz, one of those kidnapped by Hamas, said,
חטפנו מכה קשה מהאנשים שעזרנו להם בצד השני.
Activist Dorit Rabinyan confessed simply, my compassion is somehow paralyzed. This is a huge victory for Hamas. Their very existence depends on stoking hatred. If Israelis and Palestinians don't hate each other, Hamas has no reason to exist. And at first, their strategy of taking the lives of peace activists seemed to pay off. After October 7th, almost no Israelis were ready to talk about coexistence. But this story actually has a surprising twist, one that Hamas probably wasn't expecting. After 2 years of fighting, support for peace has actually risen slightly. Still, the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians don't have any hope for peace, but some are actively nurturing that flicker of optimism, and they may yet claim the final victory over Hamas. For years, the confrontations between Israelis and Palestinians had been fading from the global stage. Yes, the Palestinian issue still got special treatment at the UN and a few headlines during each flare-up of fighting, but beyond that, the world was moving on. Arab states who had once supported Israel's enemies were losing patience. Countries who had sworn they would never talk to Israel were signing normalization agreements with the Jewish state. Others opened their doors quietly to Israeli tech and tourism, all without a single concession on behalf of the Palestinians. Even Saudi Arabia, the leader of the entire Sunni Muslim world, was talking about normalizing relations with Israel. It seemed like the world had forgotten about the plight of the Palestinians. As one Hamas leader put it, the Palestinian cause was falling into oblivion. October 7th changed all of that. The attack redirected the world's focus. For the past 2 years, Gaza has dominated the headlines. Humanitarian conferences, emergency summits, UN sessions, aid flotillas, all eyes were back on the Palestinian cause. But what is the Palestinian cause? For ordinary Palestinians, it's a free and dignified life. But for too many Western activists, the Palestinian cause has become synonymous with Hamas. They graffiti synagogues with Hamas imagery, wave Hamas and Hezbollah flags at protests, adopt Hamas chants about destroying Tel Aviv. All this activism does nothing to support the true Palestinian cause of freedom, dignity, safety, and autonomy. But this activism does support Hamas. Somehow, an Islamist mafia that steals from its people, pushes men off rooftops because of who they dare to love, and aims to establish a global Muslim caliphate has become a legitimate symbol of resistance for leftist activists in the West. It's an utterly baffling situation, and unquestionably a victory for Hamas. Western support for Hamas came with another victory as well, a skyrocketing global hatred for the Jewish state. Israel wasn't exactly universally beloved before October 7th, but Jews and Israelis worldwide were shocked by how quickly the world's sympathy eroded after Hamas's invasion. Just hours after the first rockets fell, crowds poured into the streets across the world, not to mourn the victims, but to celebrate those who so viciously had taken their lives. As Israeli men, women, and children were slaughtered and kidnapped, cheers erupted in Berlin, London, New York, and Sydney. And only when Israel began to fight back did the tone shift from celebration to condemnation. Even before the IDF began its counteroffensive, protesters were already chanting the G word we're not supposed to say on YouTube, and yet went viral around the world. And as the fighting dragged on, support for Israel crumbled, even in historically sympathetic countries. Israeli actors, academics, and artists were boycotted. Their events canceled for security reasons. Anti-Israel activists began compiling lists of Zionists to avoid, and their definition of Zionist was highly elastic. Anyone who showed an ounce of sympathy towards Israelis was blacklisted instantly, accused of supporting the G word. Any connection to the Jewish state became taboo. Marvel even removed an Israeli character's backstory in response to public pressure. 2 years later, surveys show Israel's approval around the world at historic lows. Only 35% of Americans view the Israeli government favorably, down from 48% before October 7th. Sympathy for ordinary Israelis has plunged, even among American Jews. World leaders have issued arrest warrants for Israeli officials, promising to arrest Israeli politicians if they enter their countries. Across the world, countries have frozen or reduced trade with Israel, downgraded relations, and threatened sanctions. And in a serious blow to Israel, even its allies like France, Britain, Canada, and Australia have unilaterally recognized a Palestinian state. It was a purely symbolic move, but it marked a major shift from past policies, and world leaders seemed unconcerned that they were handing a massive victory to Hamas. Hamas official Mohammed Nazal crowed,
كل هذه الحواضن تمردت وانتفضت ضد المشروع الصهيوني. هذا لم يكن إلا بعد 7 أكتوبر.
Hamas has no interest in a Palestinian state. If they did, they would have spent the past 20 years actually governing Gaza, instead of stealing from their own people and using foreign aid to build the underground tunnels where no civilian was allowed to take shelter over the last 2 years. But they do want Israel isolated, diplomatically weakened, and on the defensive. And October 7th, and the 2 years of fighting it triggered, achieved that goal. For all of Hamas's gains, in headlines, in influence, in fear, its greatest achievement is far simpler: survival. Somehow, despite their degraded capabilities and the loss of their entire leadership in Gaza, Hamas is still terrorizing ordinary Palestinians on the streets of Gaza. Hamas's allies have either fallen or become significantly weaker. Hezbollah's leadership was wiped out, thousands of militants taken off the battlefield, and at least half their arsenal was decimated. Iran's missile and nuclear programs were largely taken out of commission. The Iraqi militias that had sworn to join Hamas's effort were so spooked they pulled out of the fight on their own accord. The Houthis lost essential infrastructure and many of their senior leaders. Even Syria's longtime dictator is gone. Israel absolutely dominated on every battlefield, but in Gaza, Hamas remains damaged but breathing, refusing to disarm and hunting down anyone who poses a threat to their power. Immediately after the ceasefire took effect, Hamas fighters began publicly taking the lives of rivals and suspected collaborators, including children. The scenes were hauntingly familiar, mirroring October 7th itself, only this time, both the victim and perpetrator were Palestinian. They're entirely open about their motives. They insist that the ceasefire is temporary, that they will never give up control of Gaza, and that one of these days, they're going to succeed in wiping Israel off the map. But the more fervently they fight, the more ordinary Palestinians suffer. And the Arab world is losing its patience. From Cairo to Riyadh, leaders have demanded that the group disarm and step aside from governing Gaza. Some have even conditioned humanitarian aid on Hamas's dismantling. The Arab states joined an American-led plan for post-war peace, a plan built on eliminating militant groups and tearing down the machinery of incitement that Hamas depends on. But turning words into deeds will take resolve, something most governments have been slow to show. Meanwhile, Israel's diplomatic and economic fortunes are already slowly shifting. Talk of sanctions have cooled, trade and diplomatic ties are quietly returning, and the long frozen normalization talks with Saudi Arabia and even with a post-Assad Syria may soon get back on track. Even Hamas's surviving leaders seem unsure what they've achieved. As one Hamas leader said,
حركات التحرر كلها في خطواتها صحيحة لكن نتائجها في ظل موازين القوى قد لا تكن صحيحة.
And Hamas leader Osama Hamdan conceded that the military confrontation wasn't a decisive victory, just closer than before. The truth is, out of all of this destruction, pain, and loss, there may be no real winners, only ruins, graves, and survivors. For now, Hamas has lived to fight another day, a victory not just over Israel, but over the Palestinian people and much of the world.